We are coming up on hour two of this, hour three. We're coming through the end of hour two of this conversation about the sequel trilogy. So for those of you who are hanging out with us, you know us from ATG Cast, which is our live Thursday night show where we talk about the news of the week. We usually have a guest and we dig into your comments and conversation, and we're usually done in about an hour 15. Tonight we are hanging out. We're taking this very deep dive. We're recording
in it to win it, baby.
In it to win it. We are recording an episode of Around the Galaxy, which if you're watching this and you missed the beginning and you don't feel like watching us, but you want to listen to us, check out the podcast feed. You can find us on the SSW network, where you can find the podcast feed and you can download it, or you can connect wherever, whether you do it on Apple Podcasts, what else? Spotify,
all the
whatever.
places.
All the places. Nick, where do you listen to podcasts? I'm just curious.
I use Overcast.
Oh, really? You're the guy. When I look at
I'm the guy. Yep,
okay.
That's me. I'm the Overcast user.
Beta tapes and Overcast. Excellent.
Yes, old school as they come.
Hey, that's fine. So we're talking about all the Star Wars, but tonight we're specifically talking about the Star Wars sequels and the good, the bad, and the controversy. And honestly, and one of the things that we'll talk about at the end is the impact that this is having on Star Wars as we know it today. As we said at the top, Nick and I are old school OG Star Wars fans. I saw it in 1977 as a 7-year-old. Nick was born in 78, and Star Wars has been a part of his life since day one. And we are at episode 9 right now. We have made it to the famous Rise of Skywalker, somehow Palpatine returned movie. Let's talk about this for 1 second. First of all,
let's do it.
It has only a 51 critic score, 51, 86 audience score. And I'll tell you why that's important. I remember. So first of all, think back. Rise of Skywalker came out after the Mandalorian had started.
Right.
So we were in the Disney Plus era of Star Wars. My funny little story about Rise of Skywalker that I always remember and will never forget is we used to go to, when the Star Wars movies were coming out at Christmas every year, we used to go on the Saturday that it would come out with my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, and their son, and my 2 kids, my wife. And it was sort of a family fun sort of Star Wars day. And then we'd go Christmas shopping and blah, blah, blah. And I remember walking out of Rise of Skywalker with my sister-in-law, who knows less about Star Wars than 92.7% of the world. And as we walked out, her only comment after this film was, I thought there was a baby Yoda in this movie. Right. So that was her perspective. And that's where Star Wars was at that time. We had come off The Last Jedi. In between Last Jedi, Force Awakens, we had also gotten, what else had come out? We'd gotten The Mandalorian. We had gotten Rogue One, which is, to some people, the best Star Wars movie. That's a whole other conversation for another day. Fantastic movie. And Solo, which to some people, the best Star Wars movie. Make Solo 2 happen kind of thing. But this was it. This was the end of the Star Wars saga as we knew it. But a 51 critic score, an 86 audience score. Well, where people like me walked out of it saying, how the hell did Palpatine come back? We'll talk about that more in detail in a second. The reality is a lot of people didn't care because they were just normal Star Wars fans.
Correct.
Palpatine is the Thanos of Star Wars, right? The fact that he came back made sense to them. It totally made sense that it worked for them. So some of the common comments and issues that some of us deep lore nerds had didn't hit them the same. But Nick, let me hit you with just a handful of challenges and we'll dig into whichever ones you like. There was the Trevorrow script, which came and went. They switched up back to J.J. Abrams. Bob Iger was hell-bent on getting this movie out in Christmas of that year. Carrie Fisher had died, and I don't know if you recall, but there was talk that episode 7 was Han's story, episode 8 was Luke's story, and episode 9 was supposed to be Leia's story. on top of that, J.J. Abrams was over promising nonstop. This is the close of the Star Wars saga. This is 9 movies all concluding in one film. As I said before, I believe Abrams is a fan of Star Wars movies, but not necessarily a great storyteller of Star Wars. And you had another comment about part of the challenge of this movie.
Yeah, I think that Lucasfilm's adherence to trilogies, it was neat and tidy that we had an original trilogy, we had a prequel trilogy, so there was a need to button this up with a sequel trilogy, as it was termed. I think a missed opportunity, something that we talk about as we get farther down the line in some of our notes. I wish that this movie had gotten the Harry Potter treatment. The last book of Harry Potter got turned into 2 movies. I call it the Game of Thrones problem. The last season of Game of Thrones was not as bad as it gets credit for. It just didn't have time to do the things that it did in a shortened amount of episodes. I'm not mad at what happened in this movie. I wish it had had time to cook, as the kids say today. I wish there had been time to split it up and let's get into these stories. Let's get into the Sith Eternal. Let's get into Palpatine and, what's going on, how he got there. Let's get into, Ben's transition with Rey and, all of these things that happen. But for me, when you run through this list of some of these different things, like, the loss of Carrie Fisher was huge. And, I think it's a mixed bag when you look at, did they build a story around the footage they had available as opposed to
100% they did.
Let's skin over somebody like we did for Rogue One.
Yep.
Rogue One worked with Tarkin. Hot take. I think the Tarkin thing worked fine because he was in the shadows. He's on the bridge of the Death Star, whatever it was. Leia at the end of Rogue One didn't work as well, but that technology continues to develop. It's way different now in Disney Plus and TV than it was at that point.
Sure.
So we built scenes around, you used the quote earlier from Greg Grunberg. This is terrific. You're not going to believe how well this turns out. When she's talking to him, that's the other one I love is when she says, don't tell me what it looks like. Tell me what it is.
Right.
That's a line from Last Jedi.
Yeah. Well, I think
that was cut out.
I think you're right. I think it comes down to let me just play this.
Do me a personal favor. Be optimistic.
Yes, ma'am. This is terrific. You're not going to believe how well this is going to turn out. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
I have to say,
soft. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sidebar, knowing Greg Grunberg like we do now, that is the most Greg Grunberg thing I've ever fucking seen in my life. It is so perfectly Greg Grunberg. But I think you're 100% right there. Look, let's combine your comment of adherence to trilogy with Michael Morrissey's comment that this shouldn't have been 7, 8, and 9. Because if you buy into my comment, and I'd love to hear from the chat if you buy it too, if you buy into the comment that they could have ended at episode 8 and then maybe picked up in episode 9, let's call it Star Wars, let's call it Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and then we're done. 2 years later, we pick up with this. You can bring back Palpatine back as the bad guy, but you don't it felt like it was forced to be part 3. The other thing too, Nick, you were saying, and I saw somebody in the chat, I don't know, Nick, if you could pick it up. Somebody said the movie should have been 3 hours.
Yes.
I think that's the problem with the sequels in general.
Yeah. TW says Endgame came out before this. It showed that a 3-hour movie of this kind could have worked. I think this should have been 3 hours.
TW, I love what you're saying. It worked for Endgame. I don't think Star Wars movies should be 3 hours. I think they should be 2:15 and tell that story, go into it and go away from the trilogies.
And I agree with this, and it's the follow-up. He says, I don't buy it being separate trilogy of trilogy. That's what Star Wars does. Star Wars does trilogies. Sure. I want to come back to that at the end.
But do they?
So I'm with you 100%. I mean, we also have 2 outlier movies that are not trilogies.
No, but it's just 2 trilogies. It's not like 100 years of trilogies. It's we did 2 trilogies. There was nothing that said other than, and the reason we were tied to this is George Lucas back in 1978 said in an interview somewhere that, I'd love to do episodes 1, 2, and 3 and 7, 8, and 9 someday. It didn't have to be 7, 8, 9. It could have been 7 and 8 and then 9, 10, 11 and then 12, 13 and then 14. It could have been like do them as you do them. And yes, I think it trained an entire generation. Honestly, think about that, Nick. I'm thinking about this for the
Create
first
another
time.
expectation.
I mean, we all expect trilogies. Alien should be a trilogy. Anytime a
Mhm.
movie has a sequel,
Back
now
to the
we're
Future,
expecting
Indiana
the trilogy.
Jones. There's
Right.
2 more Indiana Jones, and everybody's going, we could have stopped at Last Crusade. We
And
were
maybe
set.
we
We
should
were fine. Hey, careful now. There's good
No,
stuff.
hey,
in
I
those
know
other-
that's a different. That's another. ATG.
But that's just it. And I think that comes from. I mean, what trilogies did you have realistically before Star Wars? Star Wars, started the bar, started the thing down
Right.
the road. You end up with
I
Alien
can't
movies.
name
You end
one.
up with Godfather.
Godfather, right?
And
Godfather.
most of the 3s are terrible. But
It's
you end
true.
up, you have Back to the Future, you have Indiana Jones. It did set a precedent. It started a thing, but like it was uniquely Star Wars for it to be trilogies. And there is, there's stuff in numerology about 3s and trinities and all that kind of stuff. The Matrix, I guess. Fast forward way down the line.
Yeah. But
as
you
much
could argue
as
that
you
2
love
and 3
them,
were a shit show. Yeah.
I'll say as much as you love them. But that's just it. It is, this idea of an adherence to a trilogy. But I think the Carrie Fisher thing, TW said earlier, that's an incredible edit when you see that scene.
Yeah.
You do
it
have
absolutely is.
soft focus Leia in the front of that scene. The shots that are shot behind her head are mostly Billy, with, a Greg Grunberg facing the camera, or Charlie from Lost facing the camera, or, whoever it is having those moments. But I do feel like the potential for it to limit some of the story based on the footage they had available, which it was a choice.
Yeah.
They chose to say, we're not going to make Leia 2-pocket Coachella. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do, the technology was there. It wasn't great. I actually admire the choice they made, but I also think that does contribute a little bit to some of the handcuffing of the story. You only have so much. It
handcuffed the story and it forced Carrie Fisher into a story. I mean, honestly, look, I would give them a little bit more leeway on this if Carrie had died before or during the filming of the Rise of Skywalker. But unfortunately, and gosh, there's no way to say this without sounding like an ugly asshole, but she had already passed away. They were shoehorning her into this
It was
story.
December of 2016 when she died.
Right.
This movie came out in December of 19 because I was at Celebration in Orlando in 17. She had already passed, and that was when Billy came out and recited the speech from New Hope.
Right.
And
Last Jedi dedicated it to the memory of our princess, Carrie Fisher. So, look, I mean, I guess that's a personal choice. Would you have rather had the opening crawl say General Leia died, or have somebody say it in the story, or pull her through? And I mean, honestly, it was wonderful to see her, and it tugged at the heartstrings, and it was so great. And Carrie was such a force to be reckoned with, no pun intended. She was Star Wars in so many ways, but JJ let himself be handcuffed by this limitation that came with only being able to use scenes that he shot for his movie, right? So there's a lot of issues with it, and it comes through. TW says, for me, I still think aspects worked. For example, the scene in the ocean moon, Leia calls out to Kylo. I'm not TW. I agree. It worked as well as possible, and
I think there's the other aspect of this that we have talked about a couple of times early on, which is whether you call it the our dad factor, the 90% factor, whatever it is. I watched these movies this weekend over the last 2 days. Just, of course, I've seen them a million times, but I wanted to rewatch them fresh to get ready for tonight. And so I asked one of my 16-year-olds, I asked Lily, the one who's the least interested in Star Wars. I said, hey, watch these movies with you. I'd love to get your feedback. She's familiar. She's seen parts of them as I've watched them off and on over the years. But I concentrated, let's sit down, let's watch these together. And in this movie, she didn't really have the context for what that meant for Carrie Fisher until I explained it. But every time Carrie Fisher came on the screen, she was like, she's so awesome. She's such a badass. Like, those moments
Yeah.
spoke to, our dads who love Star Wars were like, that's Princess Leia.
Which is
I love the
why
scene in Force Awakens when Max von Sydow says, General, to some of us, she's royalty. Like,
right.
that's still a thing. Like,
Which is
that's
why
where that payoff is.
Here's the amazing thing, and I know you know this because you saw the notes, but I think a lot of people will be surprised to learn that the Rise of Skywalker has the highest Rotten Tomatoes audience score since the original trilogy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That to me is amazing because of my, I'm sure
Because
it's starting to
of
leak
your
out,
feelings.
my feelings toward it.
Right.
But because, and this is where, look, I said it in the form of JJ knows how to make a Star Wars story, and Ryan knows how to make a Star Wars movie, and Ryan knows how to make a Star Wars story. The movie going public wants Leia, Han. They got Han as in a dream sequence flashback.
Yep.
They want Luke. They got Force Ghost Luke.
Yep.
They want Lando. They got Lando.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They got Palpatine. They got their Star Wars Thanos. And nobody cared. You and I cared, or at least had an opinion one way or another. I'm not saying positive or negative. We cared because we're nerds. But the reality is my sister-in-law, who said, isn't there a baby Yoda in this movie, was just like, oh yeah, of course Palpatine's here. Of course that guy in the cloak and the bad skin is in this movie. It made sense to them. And that's the thing. And that's why I'm frustrated with this movie. Because as much as people like to say it is full of member berries and full of callbacks to Star Wars and nostalgia, it missed so many opportunities for the fans who have invested, right? That's what I'm understanding about the Acolyte, which is coming out. There will be nods to people who have read all the High Republic comics and books and have kept up with the High Republic. There's obviously, we're bringing those characters or that time to life in a new way. And for those that have read that stuff, it's going to be full of, oh my goodness, I can't believe we're seeing that. I feel like in a lot of ways, the Rise of Skywalker missed opportunities to do it for us. And that gets into I know I'm passing the good to get to the bad, and maybe I should wait a little bit, but I think there was just so many missed opportunities with this movie. When people ask me what I think, I mean, I know that Matt's waiting for me to go into my get off my lawn, and I will probably, Matt, and tell me if please, Matt, let me know if I go deep enough into my aggression on this. But there was an ignorance or an ignoring of a lot of the Star Wars lore. But let's get to that in a second. Let's talk about the good things with this movie, because there were good things. And I know, Nick, as you said, of the three, this is your number 2.
It is.
Of the 3, this is my number 4. So, but Nick, why don't you tell me a little bit about some of your favorite things about this movie?
There's a bunch of stuff I love. And this is the deep nerd. This is the push my glasses up on my nose. When we get the Falcon in The Force Awakens, it has the satellite dish on it, and it's not the satellite dish we're expecting. It's the square one, right?
Right. Yep.
It's the square one because what happened to the original round when it got knocked off
Pinged
by
off
Lando
on the Death Star
in Death Star 2.
Yep.
One of the fun things about this, and I learned this, I think, through one of the Art of books, if you look at the square dish that's on top of the Falcon in The Force Awakens, that's the square dish that also matches the square dish that's on the Tantive V4. So the odds are the spare part that is this rebellion cobbling ships together, because we've always said the Empire.
Lore. Holy shit!
The Empire has all the shiny new matching everything. The Empire or the Rebels are stealing ships and cobbling together a fleet and doing that kind of stuff. So you're fixing and repairing with what you have available. So that square dish, probably from a Rebel blockade runner, something along those lines, in the parts yard. Then it gets knocked off, and it gets knocked off in Crate when they're flying through the caves, through the caverns, whatever. So it has to be repaired again. And what does it get repaired with? The round one, to make all of the old ass grumpy people like us happy again. So it comes back to what you're used to. That's a detail that's very, like I said, push my glasses up on my nose, but like, it's fun. And it hits us in that moment, like, ooh, that was a thing. I love Rey Skywalker. I'm not going to argue about it. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not going to fight with people about it. I love that choice. I love the choice. She gets to choose who she's going to be.
Right.
I don't care about Rey Palpatine. I understand why they did it.
Do you understand why they did it? Because I don't. Honestly, I don't.
It gives the why is she so important to him to kill me and take over. It's a bloodline thing. There's a power in the blood, in the whatever.
She didn't have to be the blood though. Like she could have just been an upcoming like threat.
I think you're right, but at the same time, for what they were trying to sell us on, for what they were trying to sell us on. So this good is also going to go with the bad. My bad is I wish she had remained Rey Nobody. I was such a fan of Rey Nobody. You don't have to be a Skywalker or a Palpatine in this galaxy to be important, to have power. So I am wholeheartedly in agreement with you on that. I wish she had remained Rey Nobody. But the fact that she has the agency and the ability to choose who am I going to be, and in that moment she goes, I was trained a little bit by Luke. She has a definite connection with Leia. Found family, which is our favorite, buzzword in Star Wars. Yeah. She found the Skywalkers and went, that's who I am.
Yep.
Kylo telling her, you're nobody. Screw you. I'm Rey Skywalker.
And that's what made Kylo so great in Last Jedi. Was he was trying to beat her up on that one thing that we all knew was so important. I mean, think about that, right? I mean, look, we're grown ass men. We know, we've seen, for better or worse, not even better, for worse, people finding that one thing that hurts and poking it, and that's exactly what he did. He knew that hurt her the most. Now, of course, he didn't know she was a Palpatine because nobody did, because it's a stupid fucking idea.
Except at the same time, when she finds out and she talks to Luke and he's like, yeah, Leia knew. And she's like, wait, that's the bad part. Yeah, Leia knew. We both knew, but we didn't want to tell you.
We knew, but we figured we could just kind of gloss it. What is it? The Obi-Wan Kenobi school of, from a certain point of view.
I mean, I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt your feelings.
Right. No, but I agree. I think like the lightsaber duels in this movie are fantastic. And look, for all the places where J.J. Abrams threw, and I believe this is not him, because he threw lore out the window. TIE fighters with hyperspace capabilities.
But did he though? Because you have in Rebels, you have TIE fighters with shields, you have the TIE Defender, you have Thrawn's pet project. And again, technology evolves. Technology continues to move.
All right. So I'll give you that. I'll give you that. The Wayfinder was clearly a holocron. Call it a fucking holocron.
I can't argue Wayfinder.
Nobody cares.
Holocron. I can't, and I'm not going to try.
But to his credit, or to the credit of those in the story group or whoever who had her fight the way Palpatine fought, with the side saber swipes and that sort of thing, that's brilliant. Because those lightsaber duels in this film are, as much as I love the lightsaber duel in Last Jedi in the throne room, the fight with her and Kylo on the Death Star remains are amazing. I mean, that is incredible. So I'm sorry I cut you off because
that's it. I think the biggest part was the other thing I had in the good is, and this is, I guess, if we have a hot take category, which we don't really, talking about this being my second favorite. If we're talking about the sequels, and it's funny how you can come up with different ways to rank and categorize and do all that kind of thing. Last Jedi is my favorite of the sequel movies, but if I'm being honest, the most rewatchable is this one. And I know that breaks your heart, and I know that hurts your feelings. There's so much in this movie. It moves. As much as it's crammed together, it moves. This movie does not sit still. It doesn't have time to sit still.
True. This is true.
And jumps. You have crazy ice planet caverns at the beginning with Finn and Poe and Claude. Shout out to Claude. Win the war. Win the war. Bulio. I mean, the whole thing. Like, it starts there. We go to light speed skipping. We end up on the planet. We're doing this thing. We're doing Lando. We're on Pisana. We go from here to here to here. Like, this movie does not give you time to sit still.
This is true.
If you want to watch something that's enjoyable, that's what it does. If you want to sit and think and be in your feels and do that whole thing,
right?
Last Jedi is your guy.
Last Jedi.
Like, that's the way it works. So I said before, I watched this with my 16-year-old Lily. She's not the Star Wars person in my house. That's not me. Her twin sister is, but she was game. I appreciate that she was willing to sit down and watch these with me. And of the three, as we went through this movie, she went, "This is the one I like the most." Like,
See,
this was the
86%.
consumer.
86%
She's the consumer. She's
Tomatoes.
that
Yes.
90%. And she, like me, she came to Kylo. Like, as we went through these three movies, she's like, Kylo, like, that's where it's at. The moody emo kid in her was like, Kylo, like, that's the game. But that's where I break down. So what I've said is Last Jedi is Empire, which we've all kind of, in our own ways, gravitated to that. This movie is Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi got these same feelings from people in 1983 that were hardcore about New Hope, were hardcore about Empire. And they're like, what the hell, man? Teddy bears? What is this candy ass, fun-filled romp with comedy and all these things?
Right.
That's what Rise of Skywalker is, man. It's a movie that appeals to the masses and still delivers some points.
That's the amazing thing to me is, and again, this is that really interesting distinction between the freaking Star Wars nerds that you and I are, that spend way too much time on Twitter, that get together, once a week on our live show on Thursday nights to talk about Star Wars news. And sometimes that Star Wars news is, hey, George Lucas is being given an honorary award. That's not news. Nobody cares about that. Yeah. But the average fan, the 90%, the people who are buying Disney Plus subscriptions, loved this horrible movie. And I'm going to say it. It's a horrible movie because it misses so many opportunities. Again, as a Star Wars fan, as somebody who is a fan of the lore, somebody who has invested so much into the Star Wars world, there are so many missed opportunities. And this is my problem with the movie. Look, and Nick, I texted you the other day because in preparation for this, as you did, I watched all three movies. I wanted to give them that next chance. I have to say that because of the Disney Plus shows, because of the lore that they're clearly now building around Palpatine working on cloning and working on dark science and all this other stuff that was said by the guy from Lost, by
Charlie from Lost.
Yes, Pippin, right, from Lord of the Rings. I get that now, and when I watch this movie, God dang it, much like with the prequels, I can't help but take that with me. But you should not need to have done homework to understand this. So when we get to a point of
somehow Palpatine returned,
that is not acceptable. As a writer, as somebody who has literary training, and I know, and I'm waiting for it, and I'll put this up on Twitter as well, and I will get beat up. I don't know how that is an acceptable line in any movie or any story. Okay. And I don't care about the book by what's his name? Who's the dude who wrote the I have it here somewhere. I can't remember who it is. Oh, Adam Christopher. I don't care. And it may be a great book. And Adam is a nice enough guy. But I don't care. I shouldn't have to have read that to understand that Lando and Luke looked for Ochi on Pisana. Now, the funny thing is, now that I've watched the movie again after knowing that book exists, I was like, oh, yeah, I heard about that somewhere. But the average fan hasn't, and obviously doesn't care because it's got an 86 Rotten Tomato score.
All right, so let me ask you this question about Palpatine and somehow how he returned.
Right.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
There it is. Is the issue with Captain Exposition there that all you get is a line that says somehow Palpatine returned? Yes, that is your issue. I know that's your issue. That's one of your issues.
Right.
But my question is, how do you feel about Palpatine being the overarching big bad throughout all 9 of these movies with a culmination in this movie? Because I personally am here for it. Okay. I love it. It makes sense from the very beginning. This is a guy who's trying to live forever, who's trying to hold on to power. It makes sense that somehow he's going to snake ass his way to the very end and show back up again. You get it in the Battlefront video games with Operation Cinder,
which was designed to make these movies make sense. Yep.
Yeah, the hologram thing with his face on it. Like, we get the hologram or the Snokes in a jar in the Mandalorian. Like
Yep.
cloning keeps popping up. Cloning's
Yep.
in the prequels. Like this is a thing. So to me, it makes sense that from episode 1, if we're going chronologically, from
Yep.
1 where we have, you know, slimy little politician that turns out to be the guy in the hood, to get to the end. Yeah, I've been pulling the strings all along. I'm wholly here for it.
I will say this, and this pains me to say because it's 100% true. Yes, it makes, if you're, and then maybe this is why J.J. Abrams was overselling this movie, because he was connecting it all the way back to episode 1. However, he didn't connect it, and that's my problem with it. In episode 7, in episode 8, there's no inkling at all that she's a Palpatine, that he's back. Right? As we go into episode 7, we are all of the understanding, every Star Wars fan, because Disney Plus didn't exist, because we didn't have the Bad Batch stories, because we didn't have the books, we didn't have Adam Christopher's novel. We didn't know that Palpatine was back. And again, look, I am 100% aware of the fact that I tend to make sure that I don't say we, because of the fact that we didn't know who Palpatine was in episode 6. Didn't matter. That said, you should never, ever, ever have to do homework to understand what's happening in a major motion picture.
Even if it means that it's in Fortnite, something you didn't know existed until like 5 years.
Exactly. Well, here's the funny thing. My son played that, and he was like, he said, "Oh, there's a Star Wars thing." I was like, "I don't care. It's fucking Fortnite. I'm 50 or whatever I was." But here's the thing, and here's how they could have very easily fixed it. Matthew says, "Pete, just say you damn kids and walk it, and it will."
You damn kids in your Fortnite.
That's true. You damn kids in your Fortnite. A friend of mine made this comment, and this would have been awesome. This would have saved all of it for me. This would have changed my perspective on this movie 100%. At the end of The Last Jedi, they're sitting there on the Falcon. They're dejected. They're lost. They've lost the battle. Nobody's responding to Leia's call for help. And somebody comes in and says, "We're picking up a strange transmission." And it's his Fortnite thing. That, I honestly, then going into episode 9 would be like, holy shit, Palpatine's back. But there was no reason for it. To me, again, it feels to me like I feel like my biggest commentary, my biggest critique of the Rise of Skywalker, it is missed opportunities. Chewie's death fake out, that is horrible. That there's no excuse for the Chewie death fake out. You know what? Honestly, they should have killed him. It would have added some gravitas. It would have changed the way we look at Rey's sort of flirtation with the dark side. I'm the spy from Hux. Really? I'm the spy. Like,
but Hux is a goofball. Hux is comic relief. Like,
but here's the problem with JJ started him as the Grand Moff Tarkin of the Force Awakens.
The Hitler screaming speech.
Correct. Which was and you watch that today in today's world. You're like, holy crap. That is some scary stuff happening.
We watched that the other night, and literally when it gets to that moment and like the speech is building and he's screaming and he's doing his thing, and then you get the shot of all those troopers and every one of them puts their fist up. She went, "Oh no!" Like right there. Yeah, she got it.
It's like you're doing a documentary about Hitler, and then at the end you see him in clown makeup. It just doesn't work. You're like, oh, we let him off the hook there. The other big problem is well, I'll get to it in a second. Let me finish this Palpatine thought.
Rant away.
I could do this all day. Me and Captain America. It's just that it felt like it came from out of nowhere. As Star Wars fans who are committed to the lore, look, it's as simple as calling the Wayfinder a holocron, right? My dad wouldn't care. He'd be like, "What is that thing? Right. Oh, a holo what? Yeah. I don't care."
Yeah, my dad doesn't know what a holocron or a Wayfinder is.
Correct. To you and me, that'd be like, cool. They called it a holocron. Yeah. That's awesome. Also, just style choices, right? To open the movie with a slow-mo battle with Kylo Ren killing some cool things. I would love to have known more about that. It just felt, and to your point, Nick, it could have been 2 movies.
Sure.
And I think it should have been 2 movies, just like, by the way, Revenge of the Sith should have been 2 movies.
Yep.
They should have let that story breathe. This story was rushed. And if you ended at episode 8 and came back at episode 9 and 10 to tell the story of somehow Palpatine returned, Pete is the Wayfinder. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. I think it would have changed things. I think it would have changed things because the other thing, and this is my other major problem with this movie, is Rey and Finn. Finn's a Jedi. Lego
100%.
Lego animation has done more with Jedi Finn than anything we've seen from
so far
else.
But we've got a movie ahead of us.
Correct. However, to leave it out there twice in the final film of a saga and not conclude it.
Well, and there's also
very
if we're talking
bad
about
storytelling.
Controversy, and I don't mean to cut you off, but if we're talking about controversy and we're looking at that point, I mean, dude's on the poster with a lightsaber.
Right.
Like, put it in front of us, and then we don't get delivered on it. Like that one hurts. And I know that's a big one again for our friend Chris. It's a big one for us.
And I can live with it in The Force Awakens because he does use the lightsaber, and you can sort of like slough it off and be like, yeah, he used a lightsaber. Cool.
But that's not where we are.
But the implication in the Rise of Skywalker that he's a Jedi.
Yes.
Twice. And not only does he say it as they're going into the sinking fields of Pisana, but Poe goes and brings it back up again.
Yep. That's the thing you were going to say.
You're right. Oh, we can't talk about it now? Is it on the right to talk about it? Again, great J.J. Abrams direction because he brought that character, that feel, that sort of lightheartedness, and that it's something that's really special about Star Wars in those character interactions. But it's just such a missed opportunity, and I don't know. And I think the good news is we're fixing it all with the Disney Plus stuff. And maybe we'll take one last break and we'll come back to that. But, you know, Nick, you and I, the first time you were on Around the Galaxy, before we were partners on the show, you and I talked about how Dave Filoni, somebody's going to hate me for this, but Dave Filoni fixed the prequels. He fixed them for me. I watched Clone Wars, and now I watch the prequels with a completely different perspective. And now every Disney Plus show, and you can go all the way from Mandalorian to Boba Fett to, you can even go to Ahsoka. They're fixing the sequels, fixing them for whether you think they need fixing or not. They're connecting them, right? So why don't we get to that? Let's talk about, when we come back from the break, our final section. Let's talk about where Star Wars goes from here. Let's talk about what the Disney Plus shows are doing as a result of the sequels. We are 2.5 hours into the longest ATG ever. And thank you all for hanging out with us. This has been a lot of fun. As you can tell, the checks, the shill checks are on hold again. I'm sure I'm going to go to a break here, Eric. And what's going to happen is we're going to get disconnected. Kathleen Kennedy is going to give me a call and ask us to stop. But we're going to take a real quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into the future of Star Wars. We're going to hit the end of The Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker and where we're going from there. If you like this stuff, please make sure to check out our podcast where we do in-depth interviews with Star Wars celebrities, people in the know on Star Wars. And we get together there. And then, of course, join us on Thursday nights and become a patron, because not only will you get some free swag every now and then, but you'll have early access to all this crazy stuff. But we'll be back in just a moment with more the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the good, the bad, and the controversy.